that. Okay, done.
It's good that the Silicon Valley, the future Silicon Valley congressman is so tech savvy.
Good. So let's get this started. Okay, so this is a reality check with Rishi. It's Tech Thursday, and we typically talk about technology today. And we have always been talking about tech in the context of coronavirus and the post-COVID-19 world. So we'll continue doing that today. And let's talk a little bit about some of the happenings from this week. And Governor Gavin Newsom is looking to, he's exploring different options to see how we can get back to normalcy eventually at some point, hopefully soon. And some of the states across the United States, they are opening up. They are trying to get their economy back on track. And worldwide, many countries in Europe are exploring different options. So it sounds like we would like to get the economy going because it's hurting a lot of people, specifically the ones who are disadvantaged. But what we also noticed was that in the 1918 pandemic, countries that did not hunker down, that did not shelter in place, they were the ones who were the most impacted over the long run. So, we have to strike a fine balance. So that is pretty clear in terms of how we are going to enforce some of these guidelines and make sure that the people are educated, they're adopting these different guidelines in place and making the right choices because, we don't want to be in a cyclic pattern where we have to shelter in place once again. So those are some of the issues going on. But when we look at tech Silicon Valley locally, earlier this week, actually, I heard from friends that, some of the high-tech enterprises, the larger enterprises in Silicon Valley, they have started doing this, phased approach of getting people back to work. And there is some sort of an experimentation going on to figure out, how we can get groups of folks back to work. And even though what we are noticing is there is a huge inclination to explore options where we can work out of home because this model has been ongoing for the last 7 weeks and it doesn't seem like productivity has been impacted. So those are options that will be actively considered as well. And, when we look at technology, there is a flurry of activity. For example, Cepheid from Sunnyvale rolled out the very first test kit in 45 minutes, 45 minutes testing. And so many ventures in Silicon Valley are looking at telemedicine and lots of different opportunities because in an adversity like this, there is an opportunity and that's the Silicon Valley mindset. So a lot of the best of minds of Silicon Valley are at work and the investment continues to happen. When you look at online education, that's a tremendous opportunity. And that's the reason why we are going to have an expert here to talk about some of the current challenges of Silicon Valley and what needs to happen for us to ensure that we are creating a robust future for Silicon Valley. And the fear is, I was seeing references about how the Roman Empire came crumbling down and some of the analogies with America and how we are situated today. And there were some common threads that I actually, reading that, I could see that how, we are poised. We are at a juncture and a tipping point, and hopefully not for something really bad, but hopefully it is basically a point of time where we shed we hit the escape velocity is what I would say. And we basically cast our burdens aside and we are basically exploring a lot of good options. Like, for example, we talk about investing in infrastructure. And there was an article by Mark Anderson just last week where he was talking about how we can define a better future for America, how we can build into our cities, expand out the economy, and in fact, make it a better healthcare program. So that's the opportunity we have. And that's the reason why Silicon Valley has to be front, smack, and center with all these types of things. When you look at the stimulus package, the stimulus package was distributed to the wrong type of companies. It was meant for the small and medium business, but now our feds are wanting money back from some of these companies that are quite, I should say, prosperous. They did not really need that Fed funding, but now we have to bring that money back. And also the small business agency that was supposed to basically provide the SBA loans, that website was sort of very clunky. It was failing, and it took them some time to get that back together. And I believe that synergy between Silicon Valley, high tech, with the federal government can lead to some amazing synergies that will create better productivity and make our government a lot more efficient. So we have to explore those options for sure. I don't think so we have really done that. So let's get this going. And I'm very excited that we have Venk Shukla here. Venk is the founding chair and active member of Thai Angels, which was an angel investor group in the Valley, and many successful investments, 140 members. And his background, he was a civil service, like an IAS officer, I believe, back in India. And then a very interesting story of how he made the journey to the United States, going to Sloan's School of Management, and then many successful ventures. And he's an investor in Silicon Valley today, and a track record of not only leading companies, launching companies, but also having some pretty good exits. And so that's the profile of Venk Shukla. And he's a man I respect a lot. He was the president of Thai Silicon Valley many years back. And still he's very involved, very engaged with some of the tech challenges. So we'll have a good conversation here today. So Venk, welcome. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for having me here. It's all the broad sweep of topics that you mentioned would be stimulating to talk about. I'm no expert on the fall of Roman Empire, so I don't know what insight I would be able to provide on that. But the rest of the things we could certainly discuss.
Sounds great. Yep, we'll try to keep this to tech, and we'll have a good discussion. So let's talk a little bit about, what I found intriguing was the fact that, you were in the civil services back in India, and a lot of people go through a lot of hoops to get there. It's a very lucrative profession, highly respected. And, when you look back, did you make the right choice in staying here in Silicon Valley?
That's a subject of never-ending conversation between me and my wife. I was a reluctant immigrant. I got married. My wife was, was going to school at Berkeley at that time. She had just finished, and my understanding was that she would come to India after the marriage, and she had zero intentions of doing that. So we stayed apart, for almost 2 years, where once I came here 2-3 times, she came to India, and then we decided that this is not a sustainable way to keep the marriage going. So I made in hindsight, I made one sort of mistake, which was a beginning of a slippery slope. I said that I wanted to do an MBA here. So I came to MIT Sloan School to do my MBA. And that was the start of the slippery slope. And, all these years later, I'm still in the US. So essentially she won and I'm here.
Well, isn't that the case in every household, right? Gotta keep the wife happy.
Yeah.
So when you look back, the illustrious Valley and
Rishi, you're
leaders
breaking up.
and of the highlights that you think.
Rishi, you're breaking up. I could not hear you properly.
Is this better?
Yes.
Now?
Yeah. Can you please repeat what you said? Rishi, this thing is frozen. I can't hear you. Hello. Can you hear me, Rishi? Hello. Okay, got it. Okay, I see you now again. You please unmute. Please unmute yourself. Can't hear you.
Here we go. Okay.
Okay, now I can hear you and I can see you also.
Okay, good. So looks like we are having some connectivity issue. Let's see if we can get this back on track. But, Venk, what I was talking about was when you look at the last few years in Silicon Valley and a fairly illustrious career, what do you see when you look back as some of the highlights? If you would like to touch upon a couple highlights that was like an aha moment or something that was very exciting for you personally.
Uh, ah, from a Silicon Valley, from a career standpoint.
Yes, from a career standpoint, yep. I think that would be a good focus. Yes.
Um, I think the interesting thing was that uh, that when I came to Silicon Valley, I came and at that time, I had a choice of joining, at three different offers, one from Cadence, one from Mentor, and one other company. And Cadence job was one which was the least structured. They had a proprietary uh, that a tool built on proprietary language, and that was growing like a rocket, but it had stalled lately in the market uh, because tools based on an alternate language, which had become an industry standard, was beginning to get acquired. And I had a conversation with the CEO of Cadence, and he said that, I know what the success will look like, but I have no idea how to go about doing that. So that thing appealed to me, that here's one job which no one has done before, which is to take a proprietary standard, compete against the industry standard, and win. And I thought that that was a pretty interesting challenge, in the sense that there is no playbook for it, so no one in the company would be able to tell me how to do it, and it all depends on me. So I love that, and that's the job I took. And it turned out that it worked extremely well for my career. I I started at the bottom of the ladder in marketing in Cadence, and within 2.5 years, I was vice president to see of marketing for for this big company. So it worked out very well for me. You are please unmute yourself.
And that's a trajectory we see very often, because this is the land of opportunity. When we show up here, I was in Michigan working for IBM, and I would see all that innovation happening here in Silicon Valley, and that fire, the urge was like, okay, I need to be there. What am I doing over here? And those are the kind of folks who show up here from every part of the world, the best of brains, the best of minds, a very special pool of DNA, and they make magic happen. There is a very special Silicon Valley pixie dust, I call it. And when these brains gather here, it can lead to some amazing story emerging, just like what Venk was talking about. So Venk, when you look back over the last few years, Silicon Valley has evolved quite a bit. We have a fair bit of challenges now with respect to housing, transportation, and the world has exploded here. When you look at the dot-com boom that was happening, that was the opportunity for us to realize that we are in a little bit of a mess. But for the last 2 decades, we really haven't done anything, and the problem has sort of gone exponentially worse. We are stuck in traffic for a long, long time. And when we look at now, let's put it in context of the coronavirus world. We talk about building more and more housing, but then the high density communities have had issues with coronavirus, with all these folks passing on to each other. And we have a fairly, not a very high density community for the most part in Silicon Valley. When I look at, like for my example, my congressional district, with cities like Los Altos, Portola Valley, Woodside, or Menlo Park, Saratoga, and Palo Alto, it's fairly distributed well. And there is a push to build more and more housing here, high density housing, whereas we have talked about a very new approach of expanding our transportation and connecting these far-flung cities into Silicon Valley that will provide affordable housing. For example, a single family home in Stockton is like $250,000. And so if we connected these cities with high-speed transportation anywhere to anywhere in less than 21 minutes, now you have created opportunity for housing and also solve the transportation mess that we are currently going through. What do you think of that? Would that be a good future for you when you envision the next couple of decades in terms of how we need to evolve to ensure that we have a vibrant economy here? Because we are losing people in the last few years, and that's been a huge problem. We're trying to recruit the type of talent, and our startups and companies here are suffering quite a bit.
They are. I think put you put the finger on the two most pressing issues of this region, housing as well as the traffic, the commute. Those are the two really the most burning issues. And I'll add another one, which is immigration, this whole mess with H-1B and the green card and citizenship and stuff. I think those three are the three major issues is in Silicon Valley. The beauty of American system of governance is decentralized decision making. So 80-90% of what I need as a citizen, I can get it from my city. I don't have to go to Sacramento. I don't have to look to Washington to solve my problems. And that's the beauty. But the downside of that decentralized model of governance is that problem that is across a region which cuts across cities, it becomes very, very hard to have a region-wide solution to a problem. So housing is a classic example. The public transportation is another classic example where it's very, very difficult to come up with a solution that can help the entire region. So I think, even if you think about, let's say, BART, extending BART, the question is who pays for it, right? I mean, the cities through which BART is expected to pass through, they're supposed to share the tax burden. And people, you see, don't want to do that. If it's passing through, if from San Jose, you see, people want to go to San Francisco on a BART, it has to go through Mountain View and Palo Alto and all those kind of places. And if they're not interested in sharing that burden, that thing would not happen. So I think that's a very naughty challenge. But short of what you described, I don't know how else you can solve that.
Yep, you said it, Venk, and to some extent, it's also because there is NIMBYism into play. And in the 70s, I believe, we had a chance to create a BART system that would run all the way to San Jose from Millbrae. But unfortunately, that was sort of not really a project that that the folks here in our community supported. And so that was, let me just stop this recording because I think I have to kill this Zoom session because it keeps popping in and out.
You have to check out of audio from one of the two devices.
Yes. Yep. All done. Okay. So when we look at how our transportation system, it's basically we have not really kept up. We have some significant challenges, and in the context of the COVID-19 world, we have to design a new system. We have to build a new vision, and we have to explore these types of options. So the other context to COVID-19 has been with respect to our supply chain. And when you look at how manufacturing left Silicon Valley, in the chip industry, in the 70s or 80s, they started leaving, and they basically went to China and Hong Kong and all these Eastern countries in Asia, in the Far East. And this was primarily driven by a need and zeal for optimization. And but now we have seen that we are severely exposed. And in fact, there are folks who are calling it a national security concern when we are sort of relying upon China for 80 or 90% of the raw material that is used to manufacture drugs. And in a pandemic like this, where the supply chain is completely topsy-turvy, there is talk about trying to create self-reliant systems here in America. What's your take on that? There was a push for a global economy because we are all connected together, but now the pandemic has created weak links in the chain, and we have to create a better model. Any thoughts on that?
I think, as you pointed out, I think these global supply chains were set up to optimize efficiency, to wring out, every bit of inefficiency from the system. And that's why we had this just-in-time inventory system where companies like Walmart, would not have a huge inventory, but they will expect their suppliers to deliver it just in time when they needed it into their stores. So that was good, for optimizing efficiency. What this crisis has exposed is the fact that even a small disruption in that chain can leave us all vulnerable. So, so one thing we have not invested in, I think, so the counterbalance is that we don't have resiliency in our supply chain, and resiliency is not efficiency. It is actually somewhat inefficient, but does so on purpose. So the question is that where do you want to build the resiliency in the supply chain? Where do you want to have surplus inventory? And where do you want to have these kind of, so that there is no single point of failure? That's a very different, management approach and management philosophy. And I think people will be driven, to explore some overlapping sort of channels, some overlapping, supply chains, even if it's not as efficient, just to take care of crisis like this. But at the same time, what you have to look at is that the crisis that we are facing today is, happens is a once in a century. We have not seen this kind of a disruption, for a very, very long time. So, it's always human tendency to, to be more optimistic when things are going well, and to be more pessimistic when things are not going so well. So I think more important than this issue of bringing everything home is to have is this strategic discussion, about whether or not China could be seen, as a reliable partner in times of crisis going forward. I think that's much more meaningful discussion, because it's impossible to have all the manufacturing for all the things back in US. In fact, if this thing was coming from Germany or UK or France, I don't think there would be as much of a concern here. and for good reason, because those are the partners that we could trust to see in times of crisis.
Correct. Yes. So what you're talking about is to create a system where we have trustworthy partners that we can sort of still depend upon in a crisis like this.
Right. But I'm saying that you have to build resiliency also. I think the one moral of this crisis is that optimizing for efficiency should not be the only criteria, and you should optimize for resiliency of the supply chain also, which means you have to deliberately introduce slack. Not the most optimal, not the most efficient decision, but a crisis, but it's a huge insurances against a crisis like this.
These are really good recommendations, Venk. So when you look at our pandemic preparedness, that sort of fell apart, and the whole PPE, we were out of whack completely. In fact, we are currently working on a neighborhood pandemic preparedness program, and our volunteers are basically building masks and using 3D printers to make face shields, and they are doing all that to help out. But really, that should never have happened. And it's almost like we have been some of the third world countries have done better than us, and that's really something which is very, very
Almost
concerning.
all the countries have done better than US. If you look at the example of South Korea, which did massive amount of testing and came out ahead. Japan did very little testing and still is ahead of us. India India, Germany, all these countries you see have fared a lot better. Scandinavian countries, they have all fared better than US. Part of it is really the failure of leadership. I think the federal government, declared it as a war, and threatened to use the War Powers Act. But I guess it must be the competence issue that you have the power, and you declare that you have the power, but you just don't know how to use it and how to deliver results based on those powers.
Correct. The 1950s, the War Powers Act that you're talking about was invoked, and then we had General Motors that was being asked to build respirators and things like that. And this is not, I believe, what we should be doing today. I mean, we obviously want all hands on deck, but we have to look at the current system and see how we can scale that instead of trying to have someone work outside their core expertise. But those are the challenges on hand. But when we look at the world of tech, we are looking at that as an opportunity, and telemedicine has kicked in big time. The education suffered quite a bit. So some of the schools, they had the online infrastructure already in place, and they did not skip a beat, and they basically started curriculum teaching their students, and it was the same exact schedule. Whereas some of the public schools, they essentially terminated their classroom or education, obviously, but they couldn't roll out the online education quickly enough. And so we are seeing that our education system was also not prepared. When we look at California being the 46th in the United States, we can do significantly better. And in the context of the COVID-19 world, it's the time to invest and ramp up. So where do you see, as some of the core investments like Silicon Valley, what type of verticals are we going to fall behind, and which would essentially create a new kind of economy here? Perhaps the new kind, perhaps leveraging what we already have, different options, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's clear that, and it's almost a cliche now, people being discussed extensively, that the trends that were already in place would accelerate based on this crisis. So we're never going to see, big, big retailers like JCPenney and Macy's and uh, what is that thing called? Uh, needless markup, whatever that kind of thing is. My wife calls it needless markup. So those guys, you see, are not coming back. And I think one good thing, outcome of this crisis, is that telehealth, telemedicine, is becoming far more acceptable. The fact that doctors can practice outside the state in which they are licensed to practice, I think that's a very, very good, hopefully some of these trends get formalized as we go forward. I think it'll bring more efficiency to the whole system. But I think beyond that, and there are some other obvious ones like online education also, will become more acceptable. People, that kind of infrastructure, as he would get a huge push. But beyond that, I think there are some other areas which will, which also she would get a, and I think that's where the opportunity for entrepreneurs is. I think anything you do with privacy, if people are spending so much time online, the privacy and security, I think those things that the entrepreneurs that provide good solutions to that, I think would have a pretty good handle on it. And then I think it will also accelerate the trend of technology uh, moving into hard physical industries. So far, technology has really impacted data intensive industries like media, like newspapers, like entertainment, social networking, online shopping, and all those kind of things. But I think this would also accelerate, uh, the marriage of technology with hard physical industries like transportation, like real estate, construction, shipping. All of these industries, you see, would also, would benefit. And I think that's where the next big opportunities are going to come from, which is, application of technology, artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as sensors technology. All these things is getting embedded into things which are been more or less untouched by technology so far.
Yep, that's absolutely true. And I believe Rishu has a comment that he posted in the chat window. So Rishi, would you like to jump in and talk a little bit about that? Please
Sure.
unmute
Uh,
yourself. Yes.
Especially since I've been also I did some research. Over like 70% of all imports made to America are come from China. And since China, all it has happened before with the SARS and MERS being past strains of the coronavirus. I think that since America already faced this crisis before, but on a smaller scale, they should have our government should have been well prepared to handle an upcoming crisis like this, especially since like a very similar crisis happened before in 2002.
Correct. And I think so. Let's talk a little bit about that. For example, South Korea, they have a single payer healthcare system there, and apparently what they offer is the quality of healthcare very similar to the Stanford healthcare system. And within a week or 2 weeks, they actually tested like thousands, much more than the United States. And they actually rolled out drive-through testing as well. So when you compare South Korea versus US, it was sort of like a big disaster here, what played out. And so that's the opportunity in terms of how we can create a better healthcare system. And we have to explore all and every option. And when you look at vaccination, we had a cabinet secretary who basically said that the vaccinations would be, obviously, it would not be available for free when we have it. And then a segment of the population may perhaps not be able to afford it. And what would happen? There was no answer to that. And so that concern of how this would play out in America when we have a system of haves and have-nots, when we have a healthcare system that we have today, would the rest of the population continue to infect each other? How would that play out in the economy? So this is the time we need to pause and we need to think about a different system. And when we look at Silicon Valley, how families have been impacted, there are 30 million people plus who do not have health insurance today. And initially people would say that, okay, really, I don't care about the Medicare healthcare program. I'm very happy with my private options. Please do not take it away. But now we see the fallacies of that, with so many folks who do not have health insurance, we have to look at other options. And so that social net is sort of coming into play when we talk about a $1,200 stimulus check, and we talk about $1,200 per month. So Andrew Yang, when he rolled out the UBI, it was sort of like, okay, it's a pretty radical plan. I don't buy into it. But now in a situation like this, we have to sort of depend on something. Otherwise, they will be seeing anarchy on the street. So those are the types of issues we have. Venk, any comments on that in terms of creating a social net or not?
Yeah. For the longest time, the conservative Republicans have held on to this dogma that government is the problem, and starving the government and making it smaller and smaller is the way to is the way America should be run. And I think a crisis like this exposes the hollowness of that kind of an argument, that that there are certain services that only a government can provide, and if you have underinvested in the capacity of the government systematically over a long period of time, then when a crisis like this hits, you are completely caught flat-footed. And then you have, and then you realize that this is not a capacity that you can build overnight. So it's like, if you're going to a war, if you cannot fund your defense forces just when you are threatened with war. You have to fund your defense forces, your armed forces, in anticipation to preempt any such war from happening in the future. And the things like the government institutions, the government capacity, and the healthcare infrastructure are also examples of that kind of thing, that you have to build that capacity ahead of time, so that when a crisis like this hits, you are prepared for it. And I think hopefully, I'm very, very hopeful that this poisonous idea that government is the problem hopefully would go away. I mean, I think all the Republicans signed on to this this massive stimulus bill, and that was the right response. I think hopefully this spirit continues, that we have to that government could have a good role to play, and that we have to invest properly in that thing. So funding the NIH, funding science and technology, funding the infrastructure, funding the healthcare infrastructure. Hopefully, all those things is build. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but hopefully, those are the things that will get some attention now. You are on mute, Rishi.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Well, I also have like an argument to make. It's true that historically, many Republicans are very skeptical about the government, and it has been a very like an age-old thing with Republicans. But also, one more thing is that many Democrats, now that we have a majority Republican federal government, many Democrats are also questioning the productivity of the government. And so I think this whole schism between Democrat and Republican is playing a huge factor of why America is not doing as well as it should, if we would just work together and forget this whole political thing. Because in a crisis like this, we shouldn't be worrying about sides of a political argument. We should be united as a people and be willing to work to a common goal.
No, that's true. And I think you saw an example of that, right? That this massive stimulus bill, $2-3 trillion was done, at an amazingly quick speed. So a crisis does focus people's mind, but as soon as you see that sense of crisis is over, then the politics does resurface again, and there is no getting away from it.
Absolutely. And, I think we touch upon some really very important points. There's a lot of politics that is impacting the country, and we're not really making, I call it people-centric choices, which is actually the foundation for my run for Congress, trying to make the best choices that works for our people. So let's analyze, where our money is going, the federal tax dollars. So apparently we spend about 60% on military, which equates to about $600 billion a year. And then when we look at education, we spend about 6%, which works out to about $70 billion. We look at Medicare and health and veterans, we spend a total of almost, I would say, a good 11, 12% on this. And then when you look at some of the other areas like energy or science and technology or transportation, it is so very little. It's very dismal. You look at science, we are spending 2.67%. You look at energy, that's 3.5%. And so, Venk, I mean, where are we really putting our money to use? And we look at the spend that we currently have. We have spent about $6 trillion in the last 20 years. 500,000 people have been killed all across the world. So, and when we look at a condition like today, biowarfare is top on people's minds, because I think the traditional warfare is going to be gone. And people will look at how can we crush an economy by rolling out a pandemic, a scale like what we are seeing today. And, it could very well be orchestrated. I'm not sure where this came from, because there is a lot of conspiracy theories on this one. But a country, if they really decided, they could invest into biowarfare and be the world, dominate the world, right? So those are the challenges we have. So I think we need to rethink the investment that has been ongoing in America. And those are some of the challenges we have today. How do you see that changing? Are we truly invested to make drastic choices like this happen, Venk, today? Or it'll still be business as usual?
It won't be business as usual, at least initially. And I think you would see, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I'm optimistic that this would, prod politicians to fund National Institute of Health. It will prod this thing to from a national security standpoint, you see, on preparedness for pandemics like this. The interesting thing is that it doesn't take as much money. I think $1 billion or $2 billion, setting aside for this kind of research goes a long, long way. So, if you're spending $600-700 billion in military, setting aside, you see, $1 billion or $2 billion of that, you see, for research into these areas goes a long way. And I think it's a question of really priority. And hopefully this thing, hopefully the discussion is with political activists like you is driving that discussion, that we make saner choices as going forward than we have done so far. I think the threat of war, I think, is very well understood, and U.S. government has invested in that, probably over-invested in that. But there is one stat which says that the U.S. defense budget is bigger than the defense budget of the next 10 biggest countries put together, next 10 defense budgets put together. So if you look at China, Russia, India, and all the other big countries put together, U.S. defense budget is bigger than that. But I think the real, this thing going forward, so long as we have the enough deterrent capability in our military, the real this thing would be, one, is based on economic strength and economic competitiveness. And that's where the investment should be going now.
Absolutely agree with you on that, Venk. And so, when you look at how Silicon Valley is going to evolve next couple of decades, where do you see the future happening? Do we still dominate the world of technology like we do today? Or are we at that inflection point, that at that fork, if we make the wrong choices, China will dominate when it comes to blockchain. And there are other countries of the world that are have a better policy when it comes to going out and researching and coming up with the best technology option, or creating a framework to help their succeed with the investment. So what needs to happen here in Silicon Valley to ensure that we have even fucking better future than what we have done so far?
Part of it is part of that diffusion of innovation is inevitable. I think with more and more remote kind of working becoming more mainstream, you will find that there is a diffusion of innovation. And that's not bad. I mean, if 10, 20 years ago, 80 to 90% of all innovation in the world came from Silicon Valley, over time it should come down to 70%, 60%, that kind of thing. But overall, the world would be a better place with innovation, is with multiple centers of innovation coming up. I think what Silicon Valley has to worry about more is, does it continue to be as attractive a place for talent as it used to be? And I think those are the things we discussed earlier in terms of housing, in terms of traffic, in terms of immigration policies. I think this idea that someone comes here on H-1B and stays, you see, for 14, 15 years without getting a green card and is a highly skilled person, I think that's just insane. And I don't know, I think both parties share the blame for that. I think skilled immigration should be treated very differently, see, from general purpose kind of immigration debate that takes place. And I don't know why the two parties cannot unite on this thing, that high skilled immigration, which is so critical to continued success and prosperity of this country, ought to be treated, on a different footing than all the rest of the hot button immigration issues. I don't know what your thought on that is, Rishi, but I think it would be good to have at least the Silicon Valley people, arguing for a different approach to skill-based immigration.
Absolutely. I think that's part of my policy, Venk. What we talk about is, Silicon Valley has done well because of the best of minds who flock to different parts of the world. We need to ensure that there's a system, there is a pipeline of these thought leaders of schools, the best of talents that are able to converge here. And secondly, as part of my policy, what we also talk about is the ability to accelerate, because many of our talents here, they're stuck in a limbo waiting for their green cards, the resident, all that for like 10, 15 years. And that's really, whereas, there are other segments that get fast tracked. I think we need to make it better.
Yeah. I'm seeing some, so Rishi, while you are going in and out, I'm seeing some questions to say online on the chat group. And while you get back, maybe I could, answer one of those questions. I think there is a question on AR, VR, the future of AR and VR. Is that, can you hear me, Rishi?
Sir, I posted this question. This is Somnath Mitra.
Okay. Yeah. So, AR, VR. I think for a while, I think this was a technology looking for a business problem to solve. But at least in the consumer space, Facebook has tried. It's in all those Apple and all. There have been some number of attempts, but hasn't gotten traction. But I think AR, VR now, I think at least you see in healthcare, it is, it's finding good traction, especially when it comes to telemedicine. It will have a very immediate application. I think it will have a very significant application in terms of remote education, where you create that kind of environment where people feel immersed in the, in the reality that you're talking about. I think those two things, you see, will have a significant impact. I don't know about gaming and entertainment. You see, I don't know much about that. The other area where AR, VR, you see, will have a role to play is manufacturing. What happens is that, if you have a plant somewhere in the middle of Iowa, very expensive machinery that's from Germany, and something happens, something breaks down, it's the AR, VR technology which will enable someone, you see, from sitting in Germany or sitting wherever, to kind of diagnose and troubleshoot, you see, and suggest, you see, changes to that. So I think those are 2 or 3 areas where I find that AR, VR, you see, will have a very productive use. But it's one of those, those frontier technologies where a lot of VCs will lose their money, lose their shirt, funding ideas that go nowhere. And one of it, the use cases is, finally becomes, becomes viable. and then you see the rest of it follows.
You are correct, sir. And in a post-COVID world, I mean, these are going to be the next frontier of technology and investment, because here we are looking at a post-COVID world, and whatever was in a pre-COVID world will, may not really the rules may not really hold good. I mean, in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Yeah, Rishi, you're back.
Yes, I'm back. And so let me, I don't know what's going on today, but we have been having these connectivity issues all day.
Rishi, you should pay your utility bill sometimes.
So, talk about immigration. Essentially, when we look at, it's a policy that we have had for many, many months on my website. One is to ensure that we have a pipeline of the best of talents in Silicon Valley, because that is the foundation for our success, because it's brain power. And we have to make sure that we are encouraging these types of talent to come here by all means. And secondly, with respect to the immigration, we have to accelerate the timelines for our visas to turn into permanent residency, because that having our top talent stuck in a limbo where they're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And in this economy, we are hearing of stories of people who have lived here for 10 years, 15 years. You literally have 2 weeks to pack your bags, find a new job, or you pack your bags and go home. And that's really not a very good situation. We have to accelerate this. We have to get these visa issues resolved once and for all. And that's going to be definitely part of my agenda, top on my agenda once we get elected.
We wish you well. I mean, I think that's the hottest, one of the hottest issues for the continued success of this economy: ability to attract and retain the most motivated, the most talented people from all over the world.
Absolutely. Are there any questions? Anyone else from the audience? I think Rishi Yadav had made a comment before on the chat window.
Yeah, so my comment was about the whole focus of, about the leaders, their focus on problem versus the solution. And it's interesting that this topic of high density housing has come so many times in Rishi Kumar's campaign. And every time this topic came, he pushed back and he said, you know what, let's not talk about housing, let's talk about transportation. And only during the COVID crisis, it has become clear that high density housing is not a panacea, and there's a lot of folks who are now scared of living in high density housing, and now they want to live in low density where social distancing becomes far easier to exercise. So I think whether the COVID crisis or overall healthcare issues or transportation issues, I think the whole thinking out of the box, I think will take us a long way. So.
But it's not a one or the other kind of a thing, because even if you move the housing you see on the periphery, you will need public transportation. And public transportation, it turned out, is one of the main reasons for the spread of virus in New York. So, or you say, okay, everybody drives, and that creates the traffic congestion, and all stress and all the other problems that we have. So I think it's not a one or the other kind of a solution. I think you have to do both, and I think it's the blend of doing both wisely that would be the solution.
And the third component of this, Venk, is basically the collaboration tools. I think we'll have a world, our high-tech economy will consistently have folks working out of home, because that's going to be the new norm. We have seen this validation over the last 7-8 weeks, and now there'll be companies which will roll out some very cutting-edge tools to ensure, like how about like 3D holograms of people sitting down on a desk and collaborating. So I think that's the opportunity Silicon Valley has, and we are also seeing a lot of pushback with Zoom. And, obviously it dominated for the first couple of weeks, and then it got hacked. There were security issues. So I think there's a big hole waiting to be filled, and we don't know who is going to conquer that particular area. But that's the big opportunity we have. And hopefully it's a company from Silicon Valley that will get in there,
Yeah. No, I think going forward, it's not just the tools, but I think the companies that imbibe the culture of making remote workers productive and assimilated, they will have a huge advantage. I think for the longest time, the bias has been that the best is to be in one place. In fact, you say in my VC career, until about a couple of years ago, you know, I would like to see that the core team, engineering team, is all here, is in one physical space, so that they can collaborate. You see, and hallway conversation and stuff. But lately, see, even before this crisis hit, you see, my attitude had been changing, and and I think that going forward, companies that adopt this culture of remote only will have much greater success, because the talent is very distributed and you get access to talent. People realize that they can be as productive as you said, you see, working from home. Maybe not in the strict 9 to 5 kind of a things. Maybe working, you see, 5 hours every day for, or 7 hours every day for 7 days a week. So you are working more, but it's much more flexible. It's more empowering to people. But it presents a challenge for how do you govern, you see, a company. You cannot do a all hands meeting with only 30% of your employees, and other 70% feel that they're not as empowered. So you have to adopt this culture of empowering and enabling and making those people who are working remotely, that they are as assimilated as the person who is sitting in the office next door. And it's a very fundamental cultural shift in terms of how do you make decisions? How do you articulate those decisions? How do you do your communication meetings? How do you do your HR policies? How do you keep your people working remotely from not having any human contact for an extended period of time? So you have to take care of that also. Maybe give them some incentive that, okay, $15 is every week will be given to you. You go out and play, play basketball with your friends, or go bowling with your friends, or go lunch with your friends, and company will pay for it. I think those are the kind of things, those are fundamental cultural issues of working remotely. And the companies that master that will be more successful going forward.
Absolutely right, Venk. And we look at, a lot of the enterprises in Silicon Valley have adopted that kind of culture. Working for IBM and Cisco, there was a significant wellness program that was there. But in the startup world, it's all work, and 70, 80 hours. And I think that balance needs to emerge now. I think we have to create, the health has become of paramount importance. And that will shift the Silicon Valley thinking in the next few months, hopefully soon enough. And are there any other questions that folks who have joined us would like to ask while we have Venk here live in person? So, obviously, I think we are talking about new rules. It's going to be a new economy, completely new set of rules. And I think the survival of Silicon Valley, or even how we carve out a new course of world domination, will completely be contingent upon anticipating that future world. How do we conceive of that future world and rolling out those types of solutions? Because at the end of the day, we are working to create a very specific set of offerings for our customers, for our core customers. And the earlier, the sooner you can anticipate those types of the specs that will help you create a startup, that will launch the startup. And this is where Silicon Valley succeeds. Now, it needs a fair bit of imagination, because I can guarantee you this, that we are on the downslide right now. The world is going to change dramatically over the next few months. Next year, it'll be a lot different. And we need a new energy. We need a new vision. We need that ability to roll up the sleeves and get things done. We need the leadership of folks like Venk Shukla, who have really done some incredible work here in Silicon Valley to position the future success of Silicon Valley. But we also need the new breed of leaders who can jump in and bring in their own energy and their own unique ideas to make things happen. So Vish,
and we need enlightened political leadership.
for sure.
That's why we are rooting for you, Rishi.
Thank you so much, Vish. I really appreciate that. And, we are all about getting things done, focused upon what kind of challenges we can solve. As a mechanical engineer, I've always tried to provide that framework to my political run with my stint here in the city council. And everything I've done politically is to see what problems we can solve. And the bigger, the better it is, because that gives you the opportunity to shine and demonstrate value. And we can see ourselves solving some mega problems once we get elected. So if there are no other questions, Venk, I really thank you for joining us today. My apologies on the network glitch we had today. It led to a very jittery session. But in spite of that, we had a very, very good conversation. So I appreciate you spending time today. And thank you so much.
Yeah, and good luck to you.
Oh, here is a question.
I had a question. So education-based companies, they are providing free content for their students. So I just wanted to know on what's your view on college space education in the future and during this crisis.
Yeah, that's so here's what happens, right? Whenever something is what internet does is has this winner take all kind of so logic built into it. So there's only one Facebook, there's only one Google, and the company that is able to acquire mass, critical mass, goes on to win, say, very, very big. So in online education also, I think a similar phenomenon will take place over time, where rock star professors will win, and will win huge at the expense of everybody else. So there won't be 100 or 1,000 different professors of physics whose classes would be subscribed by everybody. Chances are there will be 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and they'll have hundreds of thousands of students auditing their courses. So if you have that kind of a dynamic, today this thing is, you are limited, by, if you had to go to a physical college, then you are limited by whichever professor of physics they happen to have. But if it translates to online thing, now the entire world is your oyster. So I think this will be extremely disruptive if this model of online education for college education becomes widespread. It will be hugely, hugely disruptive to the existing structure of colleges and universities. I don't know exactly how it's going to pan out. So what happens is that whenever a crisis like this takes place, there is a huge thing for momentum for innovation. But there are also counter forces on this. One big counter forces is governments and regulations, because governments and regulators are never the quickest one to jump on an innovation. In fact, their regulations were meant for some other era, and they just can't catch up to what's happening now. So they try to slow things down. But the second one is the incumbents. So people who have their own comfortable niche somewhere, they will fight this thing, and they will use government and the regulation and the press and media and all those things to essentially campaign against this kind of innovation taking place. But being in Silicon Valley, I always hope that innovation wins over these things over the long period of time. But it's going to be extremely, extremely painful transition, painful for those who are incumbents today.
Yep, you're right, Venk. When innovation happens, it's like a hyperloop coming your way. You better get out of the way, because otherwise you'll be blown away. And that's how, the people tend to make those choices, and which is what we have seen. When you look at the collaboration tools that exist today and how Zoom has completely dominated, it's a very simple market dynamic that tends to decide these types of areas. But, we have a very young student who had a very, very intelligent question. And you know, Venk, what's happening is grad school, for example, in America has completely gone online because nobody wants to spend 2 years in grad school, or a year and a half for that matter, right? I mean, I went through grad school and we were learning, doing research, but the world has shifted. So many of the grad schools now have programs. And what you touch upon, for example, you know, when you look at textbooks, you know, there might be like 20 physics textbooks, but there's really one that is used by a lot of different universities. So why not a professor, you know, who does a fantastic job of teaching, you know, why not have that same professor teaching across in many, many different universities? And he doesn't need to be affiliated with one, but then he can go out and pitch his skills to like 50 universities, right? So I think that's the future we are looking at, basically.
So, you know, what that does is that there will be Michael Jordan's and Tom Hanks' history of education also. There will be a superstar a physics professor, there will be a superstar English professor, superstar chemistry professor, and they will, you know, they will benefit disproportionately from this new innovation. And the rest of them, and the pyramid will be very, very steep.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So this is Nimish. I have a question for Venk. How do you see the investment community changing in Silicon Valley in terms of the VC investments and approach that you take? Another question is, what is the role of AI that you see for next 2 to 3 years in terms of the opportunities?
You know, so AI is a very horizontal technology in the sense that that it can be applied, you see, to any sector, any vertical. So it will continue to, you know, sort of provide, you know, a game-changing kind of advantage to those who know how to apply it properly. So whether it is in the fintech industry, whether it is healthcare industry, whether it is, whether it is, just, cloud infrastructure, it is analytics, in every area, AI has a role to play. Wherever there's a lot of data, AI has a role to play. And so far, it has not made much of an impact on traditional industries like construction, hospitals, oil and gas, transportation. But over time, it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time before those things, you see, also get impacted. So I'll give you an example. I've invested in a company that that's making the vehicles used in mining and construction industries fully autonomous. Now you think about that. It's, you know, mining industry is, you know, is not really the user of the state-of-the-art technology, and yet they have a very, very compelling reasons to use artificial intelligence to make the vehicles autonomous. They are, you know, they have a mine in Congo, and each mining vehicle costs $5 million. So they need to have a trained operator. They can't find the train operator for a 5 million vehicle in Congo. So they have to fly them from US or from India or from Australia or from Europe to operate those vehicles. And because they have lease for a fixed amount of time, so they want to run those machines 24 hours a day. So they need to have 3 operators. Each one of them, they are paying $150,000 an hour. And it's a boring job. And they, you know, and then you have to deal with their mental, health of those people who are living in the boonies, doing nothing but driving those trucks, you see, for 8 hours a day. So it's a huge, huge, complicated issue. Application of AI to that thing where you can make the vehicle completely autonomous has a massive application. So I think it's the application of AI to these kind of industries, which have so far been laggards. I think that's where the next $100 billion kind of an opportunity is going to come from.
Absolutely.
And what's your take on VC's investment attitude for next 2 to 3 years in COVID era?
You know, I think right now the VCs are all, sort of shell shocked because every portfolio company's revenue projections are out the window. Nobody knows whether they're going to have, whether their companies will meet 25% of their revenue target, 50% or 75% or 10%. Nobody knows right now. There are so many unknowns. So because of that, the VCs, if this continues for another year, every startup will need money from their VC. And so there's this uncertainty. You cannot plan. So the smartest thing, that most cautious thing that VCs can do is to hold on to the money they have, because their portfolio companies might need the money. And this is particularly the case with VCs who have invested more than half of their funds already. They would have a tendency to hang tight on their money until the situation becomes clear that their existing portfolio companies are clear and secure and they have a path. Those funds, we just closed their funds, like, in the last 6 months or so, they have plenty of money sitting on it. So I think they will continue to invest, and they will find that this is a great opportunity to invest, because all the valuation expectations have been cut in half at least. So this is a great opportunity for them to invest. So it's not an answer that applies uniformly to all the VCs. It depends on what cycle of fundraising and deployment that the particular VC is in.
So as an entrepreneur, it is a good time, or is it a bad time from the VC perspective, from the funding perspective?
Well, I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, what is good is that it'll be easier for you to hire people, hire talent. And it'll be easier for you to get places where the rents are very, very low. So from that standpoint, it's an advantage to the entrepreneur. Fundraising, would become more challenging, and you won't get the valuation that you would have gotten, let's say 6 months ago.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So if you're sitting on cash, you're probably poised well to ride this in the next couple of years. But if you are in a cash crunch, you better plan and do some serious planning, or figure out resources to get you the help you need.
Wait.
Any other questions?
Yes,
from
I'm
Rishi?
I'm wondering, like especially in California, there are lots of especially homeless and like the poor people, and especially the people who are who work like menial jobs, like day to day, like cash register, or like people like that. How will they be able to cope up with the coronavirus pandemic? Is there a plan for people below the poverty line?
So essentially, Rishu, the plan that I've been talking about is to create a lot more vocational education. We need to provide the opportunity for this segment of society to, especially in the context of Silicon Valley, to be part of this economy that we have going here. And we haven't done a good job of that. For example, the younger generation is very good with social media. Why can't we offer vocational education for social media, which every high-tech company needs in this day and age? Every high-tech company has a marketing wing, has a marketing department, they have budget for it, and they have people they need for social media. So that's the opportunity we have, and we need to create a future that provides a potential for this segment of society to come up through the ranks by education. And we need to fund it, and we need to create much more mechanisms of providing them this channel, this new channel. Would you like to add to that, Venk?
No, I think you have thought more about that issue, and it sounds pretty reasonable to me.
Okay, any other final questions for Venk? We have gone way over our 60 minutes. So Venk, I really appreciate you spending time with us.
Yeah.
And, final summary, we are talking about Venk saying that let's hang tight for the ride, because it's going to be a little ugly, but let's hold on and make the best choices. And it's like they say, it's survival of the fittest. You have to bring your A game, you have to make some right choices, and you have to leverage the opportunity that currently exists on hand. So new rules of a COVID-19 world, and we will all have to be prepared to ride this out, and hopefully bigger, better things await Silicon Valley. Thank you, Venk. Really appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining in. And this video will be posted at rishikumar.com/realitycheck. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, Rishi.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having
Thanks,
me.
guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.